Okay, welcome back. All right, so this event goes smoothly and the content is fantastic, and people keep posting questions through the chat, and it's great because it's been fueling the discussion, especially during the panel. That's really good, and so yeah, so please keep it coming. Again, just so you know, so this is recorded, and as soon as we receive everything, we will make the 5 presentations available publicly on our YouTube channel, from our website, that kind of thing. So if you miss anything, or if you want to go back to specific sections, that will be available to you definitely. So the second panel is about music design, and this has a special meaning for me because I don't know, I've always been into those music design thing and decisions, and such a great tool in support for the game mechanics, and it's not only in support, it clarifies a lot of time the game mechanics, so it goes way beyond just like having music in the background. It's really a tool helping telling the story, at least from, well, many times a storytelling from the story itself, but many times on the game mechanics, and yeah, and that's just something that is dear to me. But anyway, enough of me, and I'll let Guy Whitmore moderating this panel. And Guy, I will let you present people and basically taking it over from here. Thank you very much, by the way, everyone, to be here.
Nice to be here.
All right. Thank you, Simon, for that intro. And yeah, I'm going to give a little preamble, but at first, I want to allow this remarkable panel, which I'm just so excited to have this group here. I mean, this most of you I've known and or worked with. Some of you I haven't, right? So this is great. We all, you'll find, come at it from different places, either as composers, audio directors, or all of the above, working in various points along the way of music production. And I think that's going to be illuminating as well, hearing just the variety of approaches, because there is no one right way to score a game. So with that, since I'm going to actually let each of these esteemed guests introduce themselves and just take a minute or two to talk about what they do musically, and just a little bit about their career trajectory and where they are now and where they see themselves going. So we're going to go left to right here. Chase, start it off, and then we'll come back around and I'll start questions.
Sure. So wanted to say thank you. It's an honor to be here. My name is Chase Bethea. I've been working professionally in the industry for a decade, and I've shipped over 20 games in that time, mostly working with independent developers, and the focus of just keeping things always fresh, always new, and giving the player the best experience that I possibly can with all the ideas that I can put forward in my best work. And during the journey, it's been really, really joyful and tumultuous at the same time, because I'm always trying to best myself. And so feeling where I am now, and not to say that it's comfortable, but it's a little bit scary, but it's a good scary. There's just this blue flame that's enacted within me to do more and push it further than what I've seen other talented and skilled professionals, that some of them are on this panel, have been doing. So it's an honor, and I'm very grateful.
Excellent. Thank you. Lydia?
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. My name's Lydia Andrew, and I'm an audio director with Ubisoft. I work here at the Quebec City studio. I've been in the games industry for about 20 years, and I worked in sound in film and television before that. So I've kind of seen things from the kind of being the cable person, being the second boom operator on soap operas, all the way through to making AAA, very large brand games. My last two projects were Immortal Phoenix Rising, and previous to that, I was the audio director for Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I've worked on a few Assassin's titles, including Syndicate, where I had the pleasure of working with Austin on the score for that. For me, with music, as with everything in the game actually, and in the sound, I'm very, very focused on player experience, on what experience are we trying to offer to the player? Are we trying to engage the player with, immerse them in, intrigue them, challenge them, make them feel successful, and all of those things, because we're all players as well. It's all, how do we work as a team together to build that across all the disciplines? And music is a really important part of that player experience and the journey and the story and the engagement that we're building. So working very closely with composers, working very closely with music supervisors, with the gameplay team, with the audio programmers, with all the people that we need to in order to build a very engaging, immersive, responsive, exciting, entertaining experience with the music in the game. And choosing the right people to work with and building those strong collaborations is very important to me, and to the to the success of what we do. So I try to work very closely with the composers or musicians or supervisors or whoever we're working with on that project, to make sure that it's a very collaborative and symbiotic relationship, and to challenge ourselves and to ask what if all the time. What if we did this? So yeah, that's me. Thanks very much for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Austin.
I'm Austin Wintory, and I started in games about 15 years ago, and it's became obsessed with music and composing around age 10, and one of my earliest sort of flames that I was moth-like in my gravitation toward was Jerry Goldsmith and the world of film composers. And I was an avid gamer before I was ever even into music, and so I always say that the two were surely on some kind of collision course, even though initially I was sure that film was kind of my career goal, because the only composer jobs that I was aware of, my heroes at that time were like Peter McConnell and Michael Land and Clint Bajakian at LucasArts, and the Square staff composers, obviously Uematsu, the sort of most famous of which, they all had staff jobs. And that was my perception, at least in the 90s, of if you want to be a game composer, you go get a job at a game company. And I felt like that was in that I didn't see myself doing that as code for I'm a terrible employee, hopefully a serviceable contractor though. And so I didn't really pursue it. I didn't see it as something that I would pursue. And then by dumb luck, right around the time that I moved to LA and started getting into it, there was a shift in the industry towards freelance composer work, and away from the previous model of the staff job. And I kind of found myself in the right place at the right time by accident. But the net result of which was that when I did my very first game, I came into it without much knowledge at all of interactive music. But ironically, my very first game was a game called Flow, which was like, there is no linear music component to it, really. I had no idea what I was doing. So it was kind of, but in the chaos of figuring out and getting my bearings, I realized, holy crap, this is the most remarkable thing I can imagine. This is all I want to think about from now on. And that's basically been my trajectory by some good luck ever since.
Fantastic. Thank you. Olivier, tell us about your journey.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you for having me. Nice to meet everybody here. Well, the story is kind of, it was games at the very beginning, and it's still about games. Music is part of my life, and games is my passion, let's just say. And therefore, I've been doing music on computers since very early ages, on the Commodore 64, for instance, and then on Amiga, Atari ST, and then PC using trackers and all of that. So basically, I was very much into it, let's say, music with computers, and of course, games. And by the time I was, doing my studies in music, I was also, getting to to need to have a job, and then the two collided, and by chance, because I think like Austin just said, it's about chance a lot of times. I ended up making my first games, and then woo, it went on, but not easily. That's me.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Thank you. And Elvira.
Yeah.
And
end of the line.
for this question.
So, yeah, for this question. So I'm Elvira Björkman, means birchman. That's the meaning of my last name. So now you know a little bit of Swedish. You're welcome. And well, my story, I guess, I kind of like a lot of people like started maybe as a kid with music, but for me it was also games that kind of went or took me in that directory or direction, not director, trajectory. It was a weird combination of words there. Like playing Final Fantasy as a kid, and I was just in love with the music, and I started to try and figure the music out, and then I felt like, well, I need to make a game to be a games composer. So I made a game when I was like 8-9 years old in like click and play editor or something like that, and put my music into it, and had like this final MIDI program, and I had no MIDI keyboard, and then just put the notes in there. I couldn't read notes at all or sheet music, but I just clicked it in there, and I kind of just got stuck with all of that, with falling for kind of the technical space of it all as well. But I went into more of a music thing rather than developing until my early 20s, when I found out that you could actually become a game developer, and I thought that sounded very interesting. So into game design school I went, and I felt like that's cool and all, but I still want to make music for games. Let's try and do some sound design, because that's a good marriage between music and game design and sound design. So I started to do lots of sound design and all the implementation work, and then I started. Then I met my partner, and we had this idea of like, let's start a freelance company, and we did. And then I got an internship, and during that internship as a sound designer, I kind of, one of my first game music composing jobs, I had one before that, was Angry Birds 2, which is like a huge brand, and then off it went, kind of. So
wow.
I don't know
Fantastic.
what that says, but
well, what I hear across the board here is everybody's coming at this from different places, and I heard the word music and games colliding a few times, and I think that's interesting. Like for a lot of us, especially before music and games were like an obvious career possibility, for a lot of us it was like we're journeying along, music, and all of a sudden games, which was always a passion, came along, and like, oh, chocolate and peanut butter, let's put these things together. And that's changing now, obviously, because I think young composers grow up with that possibility known to them. There's schools that are teaching this stuff. There's coursework, curriculum based on some of the early work, and it's still developing. So one thing I love about this. So to circle back, by way of talking about music design, I'll give a little bit of my backstory. This October will be my 28th year in game music and audio. And of course, when you start in games in the 90s, you're just like, yeah, let's make some music. Let's put it in a game. And then you start doing that and you go, okay, well, when does this cue happen? Oh, okay, it happens here. Wait, let's fade that in. And oh, this cue should happen here. wait, that's weird when it goes from that key to that. So you start to hear how awkward it can be to just stub in music. And so that's when I was like, well, let's do it here and let's do it here. Let's do a nice crossfade or a transition. And that's how I started kind of thinking about music, not in terms of a score the way a linear thing would happen, but in terms of bits and pieces that could move from one to another in a way that worked in tandem with the intention of the game design, and something that could literally push the story along, much the way it does in a linear format such as film. So in the mid 90s, I even wrote about the idea of music design, and one of my first GDC talks was called Design with Music in Mind. So this idea was there because there was nothing to call it. There's nothing, we're composers, so we just say, oh, I wrote the music for this game. But that means a lot of different things. Did you supply music for a game that you've barely seen? Maybe you saw screenshots and you were given a list? Or were you involved in the spotting session, the creativity of knowing when things would play and how they should play, right? Those are two aspects that often are missed. And throughout the early years, there's really was very not a good name for coming up with the system or the creative sense of how was this music going to work in the context of this game design. So, of course, the words interactive and adaptive were around, but they're kind of clunky and they're technical sounding in my view. So, and I want to get your opinions on this. So I started using the term music design and I started writing about it and talking about it. And now I use it as a credit, right, in games, or as a way to, and it's to the point now where in my current position, when scoping an entire game, I even call out music design as a line item and music integration as a line item so that they know. And I'm finding clients are buying into that. So to zoom back out, and the first question I kind of want to hit all of you with is starting high level, holistically, how do you conceive of music and approach music for a game? And that's a very open question. So every answer is going to be personal. So I'm going to pair it with another question. So when you're first starting a game and I'm going to be writing music for this, how do you think about the music? How do you approach it? And does that vary from game to game, or do you tend to have a way to think about it that includes how it will function within the game itself in terms of what we're calling music design here, for lack of a better term? And paired with that, how do you present yourself to the clients and to your audience in terms of it? Like here, I'm seeing different things. Just rate it's up composer, it's all in. Or Chase, I see you also have technical audio designer as part of your title there too, and you present yourself that way as a way of like saying, yes, I compose and I also can do this other side of things. So I'm curious to hear how you approach that, how you sell it to clients, if at all, or do you just bundle it in? So let's start right to left this time. Elvira, go ahead and let us know what your approach is and when you get a fresh score in front of you.
Yeah, it feels like two very broad questions.
It is broad, so zero it in as
much as possible. Well, the first one was how to approach music design and music composing together when you first meet a client, right? Like starting a job and how we do that. And for me, I feel like first is kind of feeling how they kind of approach me, I guess, in a sense, before I bombard them with ideas, because I will have them, a lot of them. And then the fight to get a hold of a build or even to be able to implement it myself or something like that. And then we kind of slowly build some trust until they've let me in to start implementing a lot of myself. Do
you find that a struggle to get them allow you in? Do you find it a struggle to get?
It depends on how large or like how many A's there are in the budget. The more A's, the harder it is to be let into.
That seems like reverse logic, doesn't it? See, I'm getting all meet the press here on you. I'm kind of bugging, but
that's my experience at least.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, that's
for me to be
interesting.
able to go into the code and code my own music systems and put all the music tools and all of that I want, because I like to do that, and then use that and be able to do that means that they need to give me all access,
Hmm.
which is a step further maybe than they would allow me to. But then we might have rights then that they allow that use that box, and then maybe a build on Steam or something to just try around a little bit. So it's a bit different approaches where I start, but as a common theme, I would like to go back to what Lydia said during her presentation about play experience. And I like to try it absolutely quiet first, maybe some sound effects, of course, but just playing it first, writing down where I would like the music to be, and then start the music pieces after I have thought out the technical approach first. So
Hmm.
I like to start in that end if I can, or they just send me concept pictures and say do music. That happens too,
Right.
and then you'll have to deal with that. So that's my first, I guess,
Yeah,
and then yeah. And the second one was how I pitch myself.
yeah,
As
yeah.
yeah,
Because you do it
so I
all,
had
right? You do everything from programming on through and music
yeah.
composition. Yeah. How does that work?
So actually, first when I started, I had all the titles in my title, all the job titles was like music composer, sound designer, technical sound designer. Like it was just so long. Everything was there in the title. And then actually I had a choice during Angry Birds 2 that was like a company policy that they said, well, you've done sound design and you've done music. You will have to choose to be credited for one of those things. And I was like, well, music then, though. For me,
Hmm.
that was
Hmm.
because that was like the main goal of my career or what I wanted in a sense. But that made me think also, like my producer back then, she said, I always feel more impressed when there's just one title.
Huh.
And I just carried that with me, like, okay, let's just keep it. That's one title. And that has helped me with my own branding and with my career going forward, that I
Yeah.
streamlined it. I think that gave me more music composing job post Angry Birds 2, that I could take that and just present that. And then it comes as an extra like surprise when I talk about the other things I can do
Right.
for them, kind of. So
Wow, that's fascinating. Excellent insight, because I hadn't thought about that kind of being focused as opposed to, you know, showing all your skills. That's really cool. And
mm,
Olivier, I know you have highly adaptive scores and have presented some great presentations on them. So, do you find in your case that that's part of a calling card for you? Customers that know, or clients, I should say, that go, "Oh yeah, we love your music, and we know you can score this thing." You know, in terms of moment to moment.
Well, now it depends on the people. Some people just need the music. Some people know, but it's very rare that I'm capable of doing that. I want to say that Elvira, I'm impressed by the fact that you're doing all of this, and it gives me hope because it means that you will know a lot, and I think it will serves a lot on your career. It's going to be great. Even if later on you're going to move on to maybe do more music than implementation, I don't know, but at least you would know, the premises of everything, and I think this is key. And to answer to your question, Guy, I think number one is about the people. It's just about like who you're going to talk to in terms of if it's such as an audio director, music supervisor, creative director. It depends which access you have on the project, and it could be on a
Mm-hmm.
AAA that they give you access to even everybody, or just the music supervisor. And in an indie game, you just have access to the sound designer. So there is no, like, in my opinion, like sort of lockdown on a AAA's. Although I agree that it's more difficult to be risky on a AAA. And now the way I approach a game is basically that I don't know how to do it. I never know either how to, number one, what is needed for the music. I don't work with temp track. I don't listen to any references. Every time they want to, I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not. If you want this type of music, hire the guy who made it. It makes sense to me, or the the lady who did it. The thing is, usually I don't know, number one, what I'm gonna do. I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I don't know if I'm capable of doing it. It's very scary. Every time I start a project, either it's, I don't know, Streets of Rage 4 or Dying Light 2 or A Plague Tale, or I don't know, any project is very, very difficult to start. And exactly as Elvira said, I think it's about trust. I think it's about communication, and this is why I think the people is key. And you need to find the people you relate with in terms of approach, in terms of sensitivity, in terms of how you want to develop your own, let's say, vision upon their vision. And it's, I'm in service of the game and the game vision. So I'm not here to impose anything, but I'm here to enhance everything, and that's, what I usually do. And this is on the music side, this is why my music is very different from project to project, but also in the way I'm working with games, I'm very close. I mean, I'm doing implementation, not all the time, but on some projects I do a very big and deep, very deep job into implementing stuff. But sometimes I'm very okay, it could be a music supervisor or even a very limited implementation. It depends once again on the game needs.
Right. So I like the concept of starting blank slate each time, because just giving each game its chance to be its own thing for music and how music interacts with it. And that comes back to, there's no one right way to score a game. I mean, and I think that's sometimes a thing that I've run into with the term interactive music or adaptive music, that people think of it as this type of score, and that's not true at all, at least not the way I see it.
Just to jump onto your term, music design, I remember that develop this conference in Brighton.
Yep.
At some point they were saying, because there are awards and things like this, and one of them was music design, and it was not music, it was music design. And I could see the reaction on some composers, what is that? And to me, it was great to see music design, because it acknowledged what was about developed. It's like the GDC. When I don't want to take too much time, but when I give a talk to GDC, it's game developers conference. It's not game composers conference. And usually what I do is I talk about the game process, the team, how we work with these things. And I think this is something that we're lacking, us as composers, I think, to share with, the game industry, on its own. But also we need the game industry to understand our own, requirements. So it's a conversation.
Exactly. So you're appreciating in that moment the term music design to kind of get a little more specific about the differentiation between scoring music for a game versus a linear film, for example. That's
yes.
Yeah, and I do want to get into one of the follow-up later after we kind of go through this, is about Austin, and you. This would be a good transition, because you and I have talked about this, where often, I would say the vast majority, and all of us can confirm that, of composers working in games are not doing implementation, for starters, but also aren't conceiving of how the music will be spotted or how it will be utilized in a game. They're kind of 2 steps, 3 steps, 5 steps removed from that whole thing. So we're going to get into that as well. But yeah, Austin, you're at an interesting juncture there too, with how you work with music, because you, given Pathless and which was a great write-up, you think about your design for music. So use that or anything you want to kind of riff off of what Elvira and Olivier were saying.
Yeah, I have a lot of overlap with the way Olivier was framing it. In particularly, the fact that, like, to your question of, do I sort of pitch myself on the basis of interactivity in the music versus this kind of abstraction of the music on its own? And it's funny because I don't think I've ever once been hired on the basis of a pitch about interactivity. In fact, I don't remember that even once coming up in an initial meeting. Nothing would please me more than if it did, because I will invariably have a lot of off-the-cuff ideas, even though to the point that both of my predecessors here have made, like, there's only so much going in. And I also try to approach it with a maximally blank slate. It's never, oh, okay, let's try it like this because that worked before. Invariably, there's so many things that make two games different from one another, even if they're part of a lineage. I mean, like, reflecting on the spectacularly wonderful time I had working with Lydia on Syndicate, where there was already a bunch of precursor titles in the Assassin's Creed franchise, but they all dabbled in different things. And, like, just, this sounds like a very into the weeds kind of overly unnecessarily specific example. But one of the things that they added in Syndicate that they were very excited about, that was novel to the AC franchise, was this rope launcher that would let the player very rapidly traverse from the street up to a rooftop. And when you're designing altitude-based interactive music systems, the fact that the player doesn't have to climb like in all prior ACs, but can, for all intents and purposes, practically teleport to a rooftop, wildly changes your concept of, okay, well, how quickly does the system need to be able to pivot from one thing to another? So it's like, so even if we were trying to whole cloth just take what the AC franchise had been doing up till then, we still would have to be reevaluating things, because those little details push games apart from each other. Now compare, Assassin's Creed to, like, Pathless, on the surface, maybe they are similar. They're both open world games. They're both sort of intrinsically linear in their narrative, but let the player kind of make a lot of moment-to-moment decisions therein. But the experience of actually playing the game is so different from one to the other that you can't hang on really to anything from one to the next. But yeah, to the origin question, I don't think this kind of thing has ever sealed the deal on my getting hired before. It would be fascinating if developers or publishers hired on the basis of sort of the promise of what a composer might bring to the table, or the potential, knowing their predilection for interactive music. But it's almost always about the music itself, the emotional.
Do you think that's a matter of them? I find it's often about us educating a lot of developers who might not be aware of the potential of what a score, or they might not even realize, like, why did I like the music in Pathless? Of course, it's the themes and the music, but I also subconsciously, they might have enjoyed the way it, moved from piece to piece,
or not even subconsciously. That's the thing. There's so many times where you have a musical sort of gimmick attached to some very obvious player input, and done wrong, it's very annoying, and it's sort of like a card trick that's done in plain view, and just there's no magic to it, there's no storytelling to it. But that's where, it's interesting, because what you're saying is, if a developer were to hire purely on the basis of how I want to feel X, and I think this composer can help me feel X, it's not necessarily a straight line from the music makes me feel X, or the way that the music is interwoven with the gameplay is what actually makes me feel X. It's obviously the alchemy of all of those things, and it's really difficult to disentangle the parts, because I've played some games rather that have some scores that are compositionally very uninteresting, but add up to such an amazing experience because of the way they're involved with the gameplay. And of course, I think we've all played games that are the opposite, where it's like we've basically just slapped a loop of thoroughly linearly conceived music and you think, wow, on Spotify this is awesome, but it's
Yeah.
it's kind of fighting against the nimble quality of the gameplay. So I think
Right.
yeah, whether it's education of developers or what, I could go on forever about this
Yeah.
subject. I
No,
love this
that's
subject, so I'm just going to shut up and get out of the way.
no, it's really good. That brings up a really good point, because I do find myself, getting into a game and then having to describe the possibilities, right? And that's I see that as part of our role as either audio directors and composers, is to, we're not there to simply like provide the beautiful music, but to also help explain how it can actually move the narrative along in very, very real ways. And that's why I've even started using the term, music score for games, even sometimes more so than music design, because the music score is a moment to moment. You're presuming that it's going to score the image that is nonlinear. But zooming back out, Lydia, I've been this is fascinating to me, because I am now going back in time in terms of the franchise, but I'm playing Odyssey right now. So beautiful, beautiful game. I know I'm behind the times on it, and I kind of skip around the franchise, but it is gorgeous, all up, all in. It's just a gorgeously sounding game. So congratulations. And to me, the score it's not about the complexity; it's about the moments, right? It's about where it comes in, and there's so much space in an open world where it's not playing, and that's also makes the music more welcoming when it comes in. So your perspective as an audio director and longtime audio director and senior audio director running, these major franchises, to hear your approach of how, because you're thinking about the holistic picture all the time. So how do you think about these things?
Well, I think I agree very strongly with many of the things that have already been said. I too pretty much have a blank page. Yes, I worked on Syndicate and then I worked on Odyssey, but apart from some technical approaches or some assets or integration approaches that we might decide to continue because they do work, we really do start fresh. And that's one of the things that for Assassin's Creed, for example, for the audio team is great, because you are working on the same brand, but you're working with new characters in a new location, in a new historical setting, in a new country, in a new language, and a new etc. So you do reset. And I agree very much with what Olivier was saying about kind of starting not knowing what you're doing and starting with a blank page, because I do that. And that's one of the things I love. That's one of the things that's so exciting, is the journey between A to Z and how you get to Z. And some of it's very deliberate and very planned, and some of it's very accidental, and there's a lot of serendipity and luck in that process too. But finding the right, as I said before, finding the right people to work with and building strong relationships and strong communication and leveraging the skills of your team and the skills of the people you're working with to find the right pieces and how they fit together is really important. So we don't have, and I don't have, a single approach that works on every project. Sure, on every project there's usually some music, some speech, some sound effects, there's some foundations, but I don't have a single approach. And I think if you have, even though I've made a few Assassins, if you listen to the content and the execution of the music on Syndicate and the content and the execution of the music on Odyssey, you would be able to hear some similarities, because we have exploration, we have combat, we have, some things, but you'll also hear incredibly different content, an incredibly different approach, a different integration approach, a different creative approach, so it really is tailored to the project and the people that you're working with. And the vision, and again, back to what I said before, the player experience, because that's what's really important. I'm lucky and I work in games, and of course I'm making the game for me in many ways, but I'm making the game for the player. And if if what we're doing does not add to that player experience, if what we're doing is confusing or upsetting or stressful in a bad way, then why are we doing it? We really need to always circle back to, what are we trying to achieve in this moment? How do we want to feel? What story am I telling? What I want to feel successful. I want to feel like I have agency. I want to feel like even if I fail, the music and the sound make me want to try again. They don't make me feel like a failure. So it's really important to have all those discussions. And then, for example, it's relatively rare that I have worked with composers that have never composed for a game before. Generally, the people I've worked with have already worked in game composition. Although I have worked, actually, the composers of Odyssey, the first game they ever worked on was with me years ago, but they've worked on many other games in between. So I think you can work with a composer who's only worked in a more linear medium, and if they have the creativity and the skill you're looking for your game, that's really cool. And then you can help them or assist them or fill the gaps in or build a team around them. Or if you are working with a composer who has a lot of game experience, then it's just a different relationship and a different way that you build the team and a different way you work together. Certainly, in terms of integration, it's much easier now to share more and more and more information with the composers, and to be more involved in integration if that's something they want to do, than maybe it was in the past. But it really depends on the project, on the technology you're using, on the team you have. It's really tailored to each project.
Boy, and I love this theme that's coming up, and you specifically really emphasizing this collaborative thing. Obviously, making games is a team sport, like, and then making a music score is also, very much a team endeavor. And as long as all those points that need to be done, from the programming to the creative spotting to the composition, are well coordinated, it can work. Because I don't think I fully agree that there's not one right way. Like, composers should be integrating or should be doing this. It's as long as all those elements are there and, like you say, teamed up and working in synchronicity, that's when you get a good win. So love hearing that, because I often hear young composers say, how do I make an adaptive score for games? It's like, this isn't paint by numbers. This is not a paint by numbers kind of situation. So
I think there's some basic things people need to consider for interactive music. But if you've never made a score for a game before, I would really hope that someone on the development team can work with you as a partner to help explain how the game works and what they need, because it is that communication thing. None of us know everything about everything. So
right, and bringing all that together. And in a case like that, in my terminology, I consider you the music designer creatively, right? Did you feel that in your
so
work here?
we have quite a large team of people because the games are very big. So we do have, for example, we had a music supervisor that Austin worked with on Syndicate, who took care of kind of the whole pipeline of music in terms of the editing and the integration as well. But we do have a music designer role and a music supervisor role where different parts of the job can be split between those people. And depending on the size and scope of the game, I've been responsible for working with the composer and editing the music and integrating the music and also being the audio director. It depends what the game is and what team of people you have and time and money and all that stuff. So, and I'm sure that everyone on this panel has that experience. Actually, you might talk about it next. It might be part of the how you do it.
Yeah, Chase, this is actually a really good handoff, because talk about different scale of games in terms of, and I know you do, the A to Z, as it were. So talk about your experience in very different realm of games there that you tend to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, most of the things have definitely been said. I can't say much more of, but one thing that I've realized in the past few years is that it really does depend on relationship and a mindset. I've noticed that the game industry, for most game developers, have this inveterate practice or mindset to shy away from complexity. And with that comes a slight gradual loss of imagination. So we lost a lot of the feeling that got us into what we're passionate. Those who hold the passion have the passion, and it's very prominent and it's seen. Someone like me, like I've been playing games since I was 6 years old. So before I even touched an instrument, I knew what it was like to be a player first. And so what I found was I have to tap into that childhood, and that is what I bring to the table, is that little bit of innocence I have left to push forward the passion to say, hey, look, even though it may seem like a lot of work, let's abrogate any of those thoughts and any part of laziness, because I'm not going to put it in my writing. I'm going to give you the absolute best it can be with the child imagination that was within me when I was growing up playing these games in the early 90s. And so I'm perspicacious of what the game is asking for. I'm like a bit of a game whisperer. I can play something completely silent, or I can almost read a game design document, and then I'm able to hear a motive or a melody or a texture that I want to convey, and then I take it further. And with that blank slate that most of us typically go through, I know my weakness is a bit of memory. So I have journals that I typically use along, and with that I design things that like I said, I'm tapping into things that I was doing as a child, designing. I wanted an Area 51 game and it didn't exist. And I wanted it like Monopoly. So I took construction paper and I designed this Area 51 game. And took other parts from Candyland and all these other things and put it there. And so I'm just pretty much in my adult mind asking myself first, why do I want to do this? And then I see myself as the child and be like, I had wished that this had existed, so therefore I will push it into this format. And when for that presentation, I seem to kind of connect with that relationship where there's like, that's right, I remember that we have this connection, whereas we're almost like children again. And we're like, remember that one time we found that one level, and that excitement is reignited. And with that, I'm able to conflate my knowledge of technology and the construction of design and present it in that format, because it's more like showing rather than telling. And because I can do that in that fashion, that's how I'm able to push forward these moments and these experiences, because I remember what it's like to be the player before I'm a music composer, before I'm a music designer. And having that perspective is imperative to keep it forward so that we don't lose that imagination.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it really gets to the heart of a phrase I like to use a lot, that the creative leads the technical. Right? And you're starting with that spark, even before music, as you say. And I'm kind of hearing that echoed in various ways. It's like, what does the game need? Those kind of phrases really get at how we start any creative endeavor, right? You look at it and go, what does this need creatively? What would I love to hear in this, right? At this moment, what would help this moment? That's before knowing what are my memory constraints, what's this and that. And of course, you're also going, what is my memory constraints and how can I make it cool within that? That's kind of another phase. And I've even mentally, anyway, I haven't done this formally, but mentally I break down music design into the creative side, where it is a blank sheet of paper or a whiteboard. And I'm going, well, when this happens in the game, I'd like this to happen, and so forth, without any technical thoughts at all. It's like, I just want this to happen, and then reverse engineer it. And then the technical side is about systems design. And I've worked with composers a lot who, where I feel like whether they call themselves that or not, they are the creative music designer, because they know there are game composers, and the composers on this panel for sure are folks who live with the games they're scoring, right? Without exception here. I've heard that across everybody, that you're living with the game you're scoring. You're becoming intimate with it, knowing it you're as a player, not just as a viewer, as a player, without exception. And I want to hear you talk about that, because one question I get from composers, young up-and-coming composers, or composers from other media is, how do I get into games? But also, the question is awkwardly sometimes, but as, do I need to learn how to implement? Do I need to learn how to script, right? When you back away from that, first of all, I'm curious if you have all heard that from up-and-coming composers as well. But when I read between the lines, sometimes I'm hearing, do I need to spend time with the game, or can I just write cool moods that get put into the game? So I really want to tear that apart a bit, because like I say, everybody here really lives with the game and then really wants to become a part of that specifically. And let's put it this way. What would your answer be to a young composer coming now and saying, what do you need to be prepared for this industry, creatively or technically? And I'm going to just jump around now, and let's start with Lydia. Like, when you work with a composer, or if somebody comes up to you at a conference and they ask you these questions, what do you tell them?
Well, for sure, I'm hoping that if they want to work in games, it's because they're interested in games, and they have played some games. I can't say that's 100% true, because I have been approached not just by composers or musicians, but by other people, actors and other people. And when I ask them about what games they play or what games they've enjoyed, sometimes it's really hard for them to tell me. So my first thing would be, if you are interested in games, be interested in games, like play games, experience games. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's worth saying, because I could, if I chose to, give you some super straightforward examples of where that is not true. And I have been approached by people. So what is a good example of game music to you? What's a good example of how the music behaved, or how the music sounded, or break that stuff down, sit there and play it just to play it. Just don't think about it, play it as a player, and then play it again and think about it and interrogate it and break it down and dig into it, and see if the composer did a talk, or the sound team did a talk, or so you can find out how they actually did it. You educate yourself with all those things, because that will allow you to imagine things in a certain way, or have a frame of reference that you can use in discussions with people, which I think is really helpful if it's your first time doing something, or you want to do something. And then I think things have changed a lot. In the past, I mean, I'm super old, so the games I first played are the first video games that ever existed. So many years ago, to be a composer in games kind of wasn't a thing. Being a sound person in games wasn't a thing, because a programmer did everything. They made the sound and they put it in the game, because maybe one person built that whole game, so they did everything themselves. And that's still true now. But we went through a big period of time where games became bigger and bigger and more and more and more complex, and you had to have certain technology to make a certain kind of game. And now you don't. Now there's some really huge, really popular games that are made on technology that anyone can get access to or learn about. And I think that's really amazing, because it's like in the film industry, where it went from having to spend like $200,000 on a Pro Tools to being able to have a laptop with everything on it you needed to make a basic film. So I think there's an accessibility point now where people can try things. But what that does mean is, maybe you are in competition with people who have different technical skills. Whereas in the past, you wrote music and you gave it to someone. Maybe now there are people who do know how to code and do know how to edit and integrate. So again, education. I think educate yourself about what's out there. Get hold of you know, a free version of something, or do like the wise tutorials on YouTube, like look at those kind of things so you can have a conversation with someone and start to feel more educated, more confident, more comfortable. But you don't have to do everything.
Right.
I would say, like, you don't have to be able, I can't code a computer game.
Right.
I've done some coding horribly years ago. You don't have to code to be a composer in games. If you can do
Right.
that, that's great, but you don't have to. So don't let it stop you. Don't
Right.
be scared of the fact that other people can do that stuff, because you don't have to be good at absolutely everything. Just educate yourself
Right.
about what those things are.
Yeah, what I'm
That's
hearing,
my
love it. I hear know thy medium, right? Understand the
yeah.
medium of games, enjoy it, play it. And from my vantage, kind of being aware of everything that goes into creating a score for a game, whether you end up needing to do it all or not. So you understand the team dynamic.
Mhm.
Olivia, let's jump to you here on this one. See what your take on this whole, like, what do you tell that student who's like, I want to make games, but do I need to learn the tools? Do I need to do this? You know,
Well, I must
what?
say I'm very surprised what just Lydia just said, and in a good way.
Mhm.
No, because I've been in the business for 20 years, now, and this is very refreshing to hear such discourse.
Yeah.
And it leads back to what I said to Elvira and what she was doing, and the connection between like learning the process, not being exactly as Lydia said, the ownership, the owner of everything and doing everything on your own, but at least do it as much as you can once, as deep as you can, because it will give you tools, and it will give you the mindset, and it will give you the language, it will give you everything. And today there is no excuse, because Wise is free. Anybody can download this. Anybody can, they have like even like templates. You can have games that work, with Wise. You can connect Wise, and so you can analyze, and you can even change things if you want to. So I think for young composers, it's a very exciting moment. I would say to just go back to the fact that developers or publishers are not like looking so much about your skills about interactive music or music design. I think there's a shift recently, and when I say recently, it's about the last 3 years. I felt it. This is maybe why I'm doing more games than previous years, because I've been very much advocating and pushing and trying to explore as much as possible. And I think that a lot of people in the industry reacted positively to that. And this is why I encourage anybody, any young composers who would like to start, I mean, what Lydia said is just perfect, it's on point on everything. Just, in my opinion, you just need to be true to your medium, to video games. And, it's not, writing beautiful music is one thing, but this is your job as a composer, like as a composer. Now, composer for games, as the competition is even bigger than before, you need to be like, not only great at composing, but also, great at discussing with people, because once again, it's about language. It's not just about technical, but the technicality will give you the language.
Exactly. Yeah, that's excellent. I want to make a quick note here, just for everyone viewing. Know that you can ask questions at any point. I'm happy to interject them as we go. And a quick question for my behind the scenes moderators here. I'm not seeing the questions come up in my document. If there aren't any, that's fine. But if there are, I'm not seeing them at the moment. So just know that. Maybe I need to refresh my doc here. Let me do that. And see if that calls up any questions. But here, I'm going to take this opportunity to have Chase talk about this too. Starting, I don't know, approximately a decade or so after myself, what do you see as like when in young composers now that are now coming up behind you? Do you see more of these skills kind of as part of a composer's natural path here, or when you're chatting with folks who are asking you about, hey, how did you do this? How did you get here? What are you finding in composers?
Yeah, so I want to be completely transparent and say this is probably started happening this year with these questions, but from, I mean, it's sparsely, throughout the years, but more so this year than anything. And what I've found is that they don't know how to get started. They don't. There's not enough curiosity happening. They're looking for a road. They're just, hey, tell me how to do everything, and thank you very much, and they're just gone. But there's no homework involved. I've got a bookshelf behind me of some of these books that y'all are in, that you've contributed to, and I've read every single one of them, and I've read them multiple times. And like it's been mentioned before, the knowledge and the education is something that lacks completely. I mean, like I talked about lack of imagination on one end, but I always have to say, if you understand what game development is in its entirety, you'll be able to know, one, if it's for you, one, if you're able to do it, if you like it, if it sucks, if you don't like it. And what I mostly compare that to is knowing about the demo scene, which is tracker music and things is really heavily popular in the 90s, where they would take these awesome programmers and artists, and then you can have music that was involved with these hexadecimal systems to create really cool things and put things together, some of which came out to be known as really big franchises that were already mentioned, like Assassin's Creed and things like that. And what I equate that to is game jams. There's so many. There's some happening right now, and you can find all those. You can answer every single one of those things and get started and feel the what those things are to you in terms of if you like it, if it works for you, how to work with the team, how to communicate, how to build trust, how hard is it, where are the intricacies, where are the downfalls, where are the uplifting parts, where everything that happens in that game jam is right there. And there's just you just did a little bit of extra work. I typically think about this and say, Google game jams or something comes up, you can join today, and you can do as many as you want, and you learn at a very great pace.
And you come out with demos, right? You walk out of it with something you can actually show to potential clients. Like, here's a game I worked on. That always impresses me. And there are, I love that there's all these examples where, yes, you can build a team where you have a composer who is just great at writing themes, and someone else is masterfully thinking about how this can be applied, and then someone else technically figuring out how it can go in, and you get great results. And I'm going to bring up, this is fine, God of War, right? Bear McCreary and their whole team. I'm assuming, I don't know for a fact how much Bear was involved with the conceptual design of the music. Maybe he was. But that said, you can put a team together in all these ways, but if you're not aware of the whole arc and can offer ideas for the design and the score and understanding of the medium, you're a composer competing against Bear, on AAA titles anyway. And that's an interesting thought. If you're like, well, I want to be a composer for games, but I don't want to really worry about any of that stuff. I think those days are kind of, are they over, or is it, Elvira, let's take your thought on that and picking up where everyone else has commented.
Well, I want to paddle back a little bit back in time. I started with in 2011, and back then there was not really a term. I hadn't heard about it, like music design or a music designer. There was usually a programmer that had the music implementation as the low-hanging fruit in their pipeline that they kind of maybe didn't want to do, but they were tasked with it to do that, and could take lots of time to just get any kind of music implementation in there to be able to hear it in the game and stuff like that. So what I felt like learning all these things, learn by doing, was that it was a very freeing experience to free myself from waiting on hearing my music inside the game. So for me, I didn't see myself as a music designer working as a music designer. I just saw that as an extra, I'm holding this, extra tool set to my music composing. I saw it as a part of the music composing process in itself. I didn't see it as a separate thing because I never heard about anyone working with only that. To this day, I've like integrated that with like music design and music implementation. Or music composing, that I sometimes do both and sometimes only do music. It kind of depends. Like Austin said before, that it's harder to pitch with your music design escapade of knowledge, I don't know, because you kind of have to build up that trust with your music first. Like that's the first thing that they want to hear. Like, can you do what we want you to do emotionally? And then I say, yes, I can, but I can also elevate that emotion even more through my knowledge in music design. And that can become a further pitch. And I've heard that I've landed gigs through that. And for me, back then, it was kind of also a chase for, I don't know, worried about prejudice, about me being a woman. And I basically just saw just me and a bunch of guys in a room when I walked into it. And I felt I really have to really work for this to make me seem, you know, I was always questioned, my passion was questioned, like, do you really like games? Stuff, you know, that kind of culture. You have to, you like fight your way through it. And I felt like, yeah, bitch, I can code. I don't know.
That's you have to throw down, right? Yeah, exactly.
How would I be able to code if I don't like games? Kind of, it was a huge, big, you know, accomplishment around back then. And then when music design kind of hit the market as a proper job title, I felt like, oh, that makes so much sense that someone would have that as a job, actually. So going back to the question about what would you say to a younger composer going into today, I don't know if you need it right now, but you like many people here now said, like, you need to know what your competition are at least and how to beat it if you're going to go into this. And the best way maybe to start, or that's how I did, was to maybe not mingle as much with like the game audio community as to like other game developers out there, like Chase said, with game jams and stuff like that, and learn that as well, and not just only audio, because it's very easy to just bubble yourself into this cozy bubble that we live in the audio community. Yes. But it's very good to spread out. And when you know some tools of game development, as a last little thing, it, like Olivier said, that opens up communication and equal opportunity to develop the game, not just put music onto a game, but you can become more and more part of the game development process, and you start to know other people in the game developer team. I speak with the animators, I speak with the coders, I speak with the one doing UI and say, should we do some musical beat to this? Why not? You can do that. And they're like, oh, that would be awesome. You know, and I speak with the team, and suddenly I'm invited to the Slack, and suddenly I see everything, and suddenly I have a whole network of 100 new game developers who know who I am, and I haven't only spoken with the game director or the audio director, like, or the music supervisor. That can be the only way in. Sometimes I can show, I go to show and tells and show my music every second Friday on some teams. You know, I'm in development,
you're
even if just because they feel like they can trust me with all that, because I know how to develop games.
Sounds like you're just welcomed as an intimate part of the whole team, not just like this point of contact. But
and that's still as a consultant, and that's very
a consultant. That's a cool term, right?
Consultant or freelancer. I feel more like a consultant because it's such a long term, you know, like
Right, you're with
thing.
them
You
for
work on
the
a game
journey of the
for a
whole
year
game.
or more. Yeah. So, I really like that for myself, to be able to
Yeah.
have that in my life, and to have achieved that, and be a part of, really feeling
So
like a
this,
part of the team, even though I'm actually not an employee.
and that
Getting
brings
the
up a
best.
good point too, in terms of the modern era has allowed us to become more embedded and seamless part of the team. Just technology, and heck, this last year and a half has crashed open those doors. So I do have a good number of audience questions now coming in. So Austin, I think you're next on the list, but there's a good one here I want to kind of hit on. And this is one I've had conversations with composers before, and I think his name's Chad, asks, do any of you feel like there's a trend towards an overemphasis on creating music systems and interactivity over harmonic and melodic interest in compositions? It says, I'm finding many modern game scores lack musical depth due to the focus on building scores with additive layers and straying away from what traditionally considered harmonic progression and evolution. And I got to say, Austin, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because you certainly have a lot of harmonic development in your
on this one.
Right. Well, and I'll kick it off just by saying I think that shouldn't be heard as a knock against scoring and music design for games, but as a limitation of a particular technique, or techniques that seem to be perceived as, layering in particular, ends up in a monoharmonic score, or one that just goes from 1 to 5, so you can pretty much do any stinger anywhere, which is more of a limitation of maybe imagination as well as technology. So yeah, riff on that a little bit, Austin. I'm curious to hear your thoughts there, because I know you have some.
Yeah, I will. And I'm going to do a total politician debate thing and answer the previous question anyway.
Nice.
While I'm on the chair here. Because I don't actually have anything super novel to add, I just wanted to say on that subject of the young composer that I take particular joy in thinking about that subject, because the better part of a decade ago, I had the pleasure of meeting my esteemed colleague on this panel, Chase, through that lens of the young composer looking for advice, breaking into the business, and meeting, I think, at GameSoundCon probably the better part of a decade ago. And the thing that always irritated is too strong a word, but the thing that always irritated me when young composers would come up and say, how much do I really need to know games? It always felt like this, what's the absolute minimum that I can get away with and still find success in this career? And I'm happy to say that, Chase, you never even came a million miles within that kind of temperament. It was always very obvious your passion and knowledge of games and game and music design and all of that. And so look at my complete lack of shock that you would be on this panel today. And so anyway, I just wanted to emphasize that, because it always irritated me when people felt like they were trying to figure out what's the least that they could do, because it's like Lydia said, well, if you're into it, then be into it. But in terms of this question of the kind of the tail wagging the dog, as it were, on music design, I've definitely seen that. I've definitely seen, you see it in game design. I won't rag on any titles, but I was just playing a game this week where it felt like they conceived, this is not in the realm of music, but from a narrative standpoint, it really felt like they conceived of this really cool underlying series of integrated systems through which to kind of deploy narrative information. I'm being deliberately vague because I don't want to single out a title that I hated. But it really felt like they felt so in love with the idea of how to tell their story that they forgot to write a good story. And so you're like, oh, if I do this, then this dialogue happens. But if I do that, then this other dialogue happens. And if I do this, this other dialogue that happens. But the dialogue itself is painfully uninteresting. And so, and I think that it's very easy to slip into a musical corollary of that, of, oh, how cool would it be if every time the player goes, they turn left, we transition to a cue that does this. And then every time we do this, then we drop this stem. And if the player stops and takes their hand off the mouse, we take away the hi-hat. It's one of those, that's why I love the way that Olivier phrased it, because something I've always admired in Olivier's work is that there's total command over everything that's possible, but not every game is this arms race to show everything that has ever been done in this title. It's like, let's do exactly what's needed. I remember coming straight out of Journey, where there was, that's not an open world game. So it was always just about how to elegantly go from moment to moment. But it still got quite complicated, even within the relatively simple kind of design that we were operating within. And then going into the Banner Saga, which in many ways had so many more, it was even more simple. And so I was like coming out of this thing where it felt like we had put together this clockwork machinery, and then realizing, it actually doesn't need to be that complicated this time, because this game, I'll be adding things that are not in service of the game. It's not in service of the player's ultimate experience. And yes, I do think it's an easy trap to fall into, especially when you love music design and interactive systems. It's exciting. Oh crap, how cool is it that I can shift to this and then do that and then add the stem and drop this other thing and pitch this, but then do you actually have to do all those things? In most cases, maybe not.
You're losing your what you really want to do, and that's move the player for doing something tricky and cool, right? In those cases, you really point out, like, I find this two ends of the spectrum. One was the young composer you mentioned, that comes up to you and says, how little can I get away with, right? And that's on one far end of the spectrum. And on the other, you have people who are so into the tech and the ideas behind design that they lose sight of what they're trying to communicate. And it's just tricky for tricky's sake. And often that does a huge disservice to the idea of interactive music adapted and design, because someone says, look at all this cool stuff I did. And then you hear it and the music doesn't deliver. It's not the right emotion for the moment, just musically speaking. And it's calling attention to itself unnecessarily, rather than emphasizing the story, right? And that's,
or you're just doing things that have no impact.
They have zero.
Forgive me for speaking.
Please, no. This is the time.
I had a friend ask me to play their game recently and give them feedback on how the music was implemented, or just kind of in general, I guess. And I remember, I played it, got some thoughts, and then started talking. And when we came to the music interactivity, I said, it said it feels really samey for really long stretches of time. And there were a lot of different things that I did that felt like they could have meaningfully impacted the music. And I'm curious. And they said, oh, that's funny, because we have like 65 transitions that occurred. And I was like, Jesus. I said, well, I hate to break it to you that your incredible contact machine level complexity ended up yielding something that felt incredible. It felt like playback of an album, to be honest. Like it actually, you had so much going on, it all kind of canceled itself out, and there was no impact or meaning to it. So
I've witnessed that for sure. No, that's great. And so now I'm going to riff on some questions and open the floor. So I'll present a question from our viewing audience here, listening audience. And if you want to chime in on it, you feel particularly moved to, please do. We got about, I think, 10-ish, 12 minutes left or something like that, or until they kick us off. So Marty is asking, a lot of us here are what I would call like auteurs. We're like masters of our own destiny. I certainly fall into that category sometimes when I'm like conceive all the way through implementation. And I know all of us are sort of on the spectrum there somewhere. And Marty's asking about, can you ever have too many chefs in the kitchen, so to speak, and when that where it's like too many stakeholders in what the music should be doing, can that cause an issue? Anybody want to think about that one? Mm-hmm.
I definitely have had sent Spotify lists to me where everyone in the team could add music. And that became very confusing of what they actually wanted when no one had an ownership of what the vision was, because it was very clear that they had some kind of vision that they wanted to present first before I presented a vision for it. And that was it was too many chefs in that pot, at least.
Too many inputs coming in.
Yeah, and it's also hard because it's so subjective when someone calls something like, oh, I really want to feel this thing, and then they show a music piece that I feel like, wait, what? I don't feel that thing out of this music piece at all. But then you have to like understand that maybe they have a lot of other attachment to the music piece that is something else beyond the actual music itself. And what is that, and how can we touch upon that? If you need to read 10 people like that, like read them and try to interpret it, have some EQ about it, the soft skills to know what they're thinking. If you need, like, it's easier to focus on 2 people, maybe. You can have that with,
and that's
like 10
a true
people.
Collaboration is where you're actually making progress and honing a vision, not just putting a bunch of stuff in a pot and stirring and hoping something cool comes out. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. Let me throw another question out here, unless anybody else wants to jump in. But Ola is asking about how do you go about designing and writing music for a game that isn't necessarily that interactive, but it's more about how a player can spend hours playing, where the music is more of a backdrop. How do you keep that interesting? And there's games that are more experiential as opposed to progressive. Anybody want to think about that? I see. Looks like
a more static game.
I need to know more about the game they're describing.
See, there you go. That's perfect.
Like,
perfect answer.
Because the thing is, I can't really think of any game, even one that you could call thoroughly experiential, which I guess means sort of light on mechanics or difficulty or something, that the player is doing nothing, truly nothing. I mean, if we're talking about something that is barely more than a screensaver, there's still a million things that you could do that I think would be interesting. But this is a question that comes up all the time on really long games. How do we not fatigue the player? Which is sort of an adjacent question, not really exactly what was asked, but how do we?
I think that's fair, though.
Not bludgeon them to death because they're going to be hearing 40 hours of gameplay or 100 hours of gameplay, and there's not 100 hours of novel music. But that's like it's a whole. Basically, that's hour 2 of this conversation about how different ways of addressing that. I kind of am hesitant to crack that open in whatever you said, 10 minutes.
Yeah,
I think it kind of touched upon as well, like the what everyone talked about that doesn't need like overabundance of music design, or like you don't need to complicate it if it's not needed really. Like just tackle it with an emotional touch. Like, what do you want the player to feel right now when they're standing still doing nothing? Apparently, you want them to feel something, right? Like,
the most simple gesture can have the most impact, right? And
and maybe you stand still and make some little music piece, but when they take the first step forward into the void, you swell the music and you're like, wow, I made a step for humanity. You never know.
Right.
There's this game called Proteus. If you don't know this game, this is exactly that. It's an experience. No progression, no nothing. Everything is design, music, everything is, I mean, that was incredible.
Yeah. It's just an exploration, right?
That's also one where the composer was the game designer.
Yeah. It was great. Yeah, that's a good one. Let me see if I can get to a few more here. Let's see. Where was this one? Has it, in your early days of building a career, what were some of the most memorable lessons made in times where you weren't sure how you wanted to get? This is obviously broad, but let's kind of zero that in. Like, in those moments of doubt early in your career, what were the moments that kind of turned you back towards games, towards music again? Like, everybody has those moments of doubt. Like, what the hell am I doing here? Right? And there's actually points way deep into my career, 20, 25 years in, where I'm like,
I was going to say, why are we limiting that to the early days?
That
was this morning.
That was last year. Yeah, exactly. This morning, it's like you run into something like, oh my God. And tell you how many times I wanted to just pack up and move to the Arctic. And what always brings you back, Anybody want to kind of? And
I
it's
know
a very
that
broad, but
the thing that made me brave to face it, because I always wanted it, was that I tried to, since I went to game design school, I made a level design portfolio. But the people around me said, like, hey, you should really do music instead. And they kind of gave me the confidence to aim for it a little bit, because I always talked about it all the time. They were like, do you really want to work with level design? Because you're kind of talking about music all the time.
Right.
But I was like into, like, I should be this because I'm studying game design, so I should obviously become that. But then I threw away my level design portfolio and switched it out to a music portfolio
that's
instead
obviously
when we were
complemented
looking
your
for
music, right? We are at time, but we are at time, and I've been told that we have to kind of not start, but we are wrapping up. If there's any last word, I'm happy to, like, if you have a short little thing, and I know Simon's going to kind of close this out for us here too. But this has been, wow, we could go on well into Elvira's night, the rest of my day, and continue chatting about this. So
it's already night here.
Yeah, exactly. You could go till past midnight. And I hope that this stirs the conversation amongst the group that's watching this. Thank you, everybody, for checking this out. And you see that this is a deep and large conversation that is not over. Scoring games and music design is in its infancy still, right? And we're just beginning. That's what's so exciting about it. I think that's why everyone here, one reason we all love doing this. And with that, I will hand it back to Simon. Thank you for the opportunity,
Great.
Simon, and Audiokinetic.
Great. Thank you very much, Guy. Thanks, Chase, Lydia, Austin, Olivier, Elvira. Really fantastic. And as you were saying, Guy, it feels like the room was warming up and we were getting into it. I had a feeling of, if you ever went to develop, and at the end of the day in the lounge, like the discussion starts and so on, and it goes up to midnight, and so that kind of momentum, of feeling that we had. So thank you very much for your participation. That's been great, and we will take another 5-minute breaks just before we get to the very last presentation. And that will be making interactive music for linear composers. So Ressa Schwarzwald will join us and guide us through her process and everything cool she does. So see you in 5 minutes. Cheers.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Cheers.